The debris field smelled like burnt metal and old silence. Roland Varus had been walking through it for 4 hours in a suit that pinched his left shoulder, collecting samples that nobody would probably ever read, tagging wreck pieces that were older than the ship he worked on. Routine sweep. The kind of work that filled the hours between real problems. He came back aboard the GFS Irongate with a sore back, a half-empty sample case, and a strong desire to not talk to anyone. He got all three. The maintenance bay was empty at this hour, which was exactly what he wanted. He set the sample case on the bench, unclipped his gloves, and started working his way through the EVA gear the way he always did, methodical, quiet, piece by piece. He reached for his helmet last. It shifted before he touched it. He stopped. He looked at the helmet sitting on the bench. He waited. It did not shift again. He picked it up slowly, angled it toward the light, and looked inside. 2 silver eyes looked back at him. The creature inside the helmet was small enough to fit in his closed fist. Its scales were the deep blue of ocean water when you look straight down into it, not bright, not flashy, just deep. Its wings were folded so tight against its body that it looked like a small, angry stone. It was trembling. It was also trying very hard to look like it was not trembling, which Roland could respect. It opened its mouth and made a sound somewhere between a hiss and a kettle about to boil. Roland looked at it for a moment. Then he carefully set the helmet down on the bench, reached in with 2 fingers, and waited. The creature bit him. Not hard enough to break the suit liner, more like a warning. He kept his hands still. It bit harder. He still did not move. The creature stopped biting and stared at him with an expression that, on a larger animal, he might have called baffled. He could see its ribs moving fast. Small, quick breaths. It had probably been in the helmet since before the sweep started. 4 hours in a sealed EVA helmet was a long time to be small and scared and hiding from something. He did not know what it was. He had guesses. The shape of the wings, the scale pattern, the silver eyes. There were records about dragons in the fringe territories, mostly diplomatic files he had never had reason to read. He was reading them now in his head and coming up mostly blank. He wrapped the creature in his spare undershirt from his kit bag. It struggled for about 3 seconds, then went still. He tucked the bundle inside his jacket, picked up the sample case, and walked out of the maintenance bay like nothing had happened. His bunkmate Bree Aldani was sitting on her bed reading something when he came in. She looked up. She looked at the small moving shape inside his jacket. She looked back at his face. "No," she said. "I need you to not say anything," he said. "Roland, just for tonight." Bree set her reader down. She watched him sit on his bunk and carefully open his jacket. The creature emerged from the undershirt, looked around the room with those pale silver eyes, saw Bree, and hissed. Bree leaned forward with her elbows on her knees. "That is a baby dragon. I am not sure what it is. It has wings, scales, and it just hissed at me. That is a dragon." He did not argue. He broke a piece off his ration bar and held it out. The creature sniffed it, then took it from his fingers with a speed that made him pull back slightly. It ate the whole piece in 4 seconds and looked at him like it expected more. He gave it more. "You are feeding it," Bree said. "It is hungry. You cannot keep it." "I am not keeping it. I am figuring out what to do with it." Bree looked at the creature, which had finished the ration bar and was now pressing itself against Roland's side with its eyes half closed. "What are you going to call it?" she asked. "Nothing. I am not naming it." "She," said Bree. "Look at her. She is a she." He looked. He had no way to confirm that. He also did not argue. Bree said, "I am going to call her Syrah." "You can call her whatever you want. I am not calling her anything." Syrah, if that was her name now, which Roland was not admitting, finished pressing herself against his ribs, made a sound like a small engine settling down, and went to sleep. On him, directly on him. He sat very still. Bree watched this with an expression he did not like. It was the expression she used when she thought she was right about something and was waiting for him to figure it out himself. "She chose you," Bree said quietly. She was trapped in my helmet. She had no options. Maybe, Bree picked up her reader again, or maybe she had exactly the option she wanted. The ship hummed around them. Roland stayed still and looked at the ceiling and thought about the 400 regulations he was probably breaking, and the political implications of a dragon hatchling aboard a human patrol vessel, and the formal report he should file in the morning. He thought about all of that for a long time. Then he reached over and turned off his bunk light so she could sleep better. Nobody tells you how fast something can go from temporary problem to part of the routine. Roland found out in under 2 days. On the first morning, Sira woke before him, climbed his arm like it was a tree branch, and sat on his shoulder staring at the wall with the focused intensity of someone reading a language they almost understand. He lay still and waited for her to do something alarming. She did not. She simply watched the wall. When he finally moved to get up, she shifted her weight to stay balanced without even looking at him. He told himself that did not mean anything. On the second day, Bree came back to the bunk to find her personal comm unit in 8 precise pieces, arranged in a neat row on her pillow. Sira sat beside the pieces with her tail wrapped around her feet, watching Bree's face the way a scientist watches a chemical reaction. Bree's reaction was detailed and loud. Sira's head tilted left, then right, cataloging it all. Roland put the comm unit back together. It worked fine. He said nothing. On the fourth day, he visited Dr. Osa Prin in the biology lab on the pretense of asking about a specimen he had found in the debris field. He produced a single scale, small, blue, with a faint silver edge, and slid it across her desk. Prin picked it up, turned it under her light, and said, "Draconic." "I found it in the field," Roland said. Prin looked at him in the way she looked at biological samples she did not yet have a category for, just the one scale. "That is all I could find." She held his gaze for a moment. He held hers back. She set the scale down and made a note in her file. "I will look into it," she said. "Check back with me." He nodded and left. He did not check back with her. On the sixth day, Sira started making sounds, not the hissing from the first day. These were deliberate sounds, low, shaped, structured. She would sit near Roland while he worked on equipment in the bunk and produce a sound, then pause as if waiting for something. It took him until the second hour to realize she was mimicking the rhythm of his voice, not the words, just the shape of how he talked, the pauses, the rises, the short, flat sentences he favored. She was studying him. He found this unsettling and impressive in equal measure. On the ninth day, he made the mistake. He had been telling Bree about a pressure valve problem in the lower deck, and midway through the sentence, he looked at the small blue shape watching him from the corner of his bunk and said, "Sira, stop pulling at that cable." He said it without thinking. He stopped, looked at what he had just done. Sira looked back at him with her silver eyes and made a sound that Bree, from across the room, described as laughing. "You named her," Bree said. "I was using your name for her." "You were using a name for her." He picked up his work notes and found something to read. On the 11th day, the ship ran a full emergency drill. Roland was in the lower deck when it started and could not get back to the bunk for 40 minutes. He moved fast the whole way back, which was not something he usually did. He found Sira pressed into the back corner of his open locker, wings tight, eyes wide. The locker smelled faintly of ozone. Bree told him afterward that 3 crew members on their corridor had filed reports about a pressure behind their eyes during the drill, a strange sensation, like the start of a headache that never arrived. Roland sat on the floor in front of the locker and did not say anything. After a few minutes, Sira crawled out, crossed the floor slowly, and pressed herself against his knee. The ozone smell faded. He did not report the pressure incidents. On the 13th day, she spoke. She had been working up to it for a week. The sounds had gotten sharper, more specific, closer to something recognizable. He was pulling on his boots to head to a maintenance shift when she reached out, grabbed his sleeve with 2 small clawed feet, and said, clearly and flatly, "Stay." He looked at her, she looked at him. She did not let go of the sleeve. He was late to the shift. On the 14th day, the Iron Gate docked at Aldrich Station for resupply. Roland was running a cable check in the lower bay when one of the junior crew members mentioned, very casually, that a draconic conclave diplomatic vessel had arrived at the station 2 days ago. Apparently a hatchling had gone missing in the fringe expanse 3 weeks back. The conclave was asking questions at every port in the region. Roland finished the cable check. He went back to the bunk. Syrah was awake, sitting in the middle of his bunk, watching the door the way she always did when she was waiting for him. She made a small sound when he came in, not a word, not yet, just a sound that meant she recognized him. He sat down, she climbed into his lap. He looked at the wall. He had 14 hours before the conclave vessel was scheduled to leave the station. He had no plan. He had no legal standing. He had a baby dragon in his lap who had said one word in her entire life, and that word was stay. He started thinking. None of the options were good, he thought anyway. The thing about secrets on a ship is that the ship is always breathing. The ventilation runs through everything. The walls are thin, and the ship's doctor runs biometric scans on every compartment every 72 hours as a matter of standing medical protocol. Dr. Prin found the resonance signature at hour 68. She did not come to Roland first. She went to Admiral Don because that was her obligation, and Prin was a person who took her obligations seriously. By the time Roland was called to the Admiral's office, Don had already spoken to the conclave vessel at the station, and Councillor Vret had already filed a formal retrieval request under 3 separate interstellar agreements. Don was sitting behind his desk when Roland came in. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who had been tired for a long time and had just been handed one more thing. "You found a hatchling in the debris field," Don said. "Yes," Roland said. 14 days ago." "Yes." Don was quiet for a moment. The conclave wants her back. Under the natal writ, an unbonded hatchling outside conclave territory is their legal property. I have no ground to refuse. He paused. "You have until tomorrow morning." Roland asked his question. What happens to unbonded hatchlings returned to the conclave? Don did not answer immediately. He looked at his desk. He looked back at Roland. That pause was an answer. Councillor Vret met Roland in the station's neutral conference room an hour later. Vret was tall and precise, the kind of person who measured words before he spent them. He explained, without apparent emotion, that the hatchling was a ward of the conclave who had been lost during a transport incident. She would be returned to the appropriate facility and reintegrated into conclave care. Roland asked about the bond. Vret acknowledged it with a small tilt of his head. "Cross-species bonding is documented," he said. "It is also reversible under conclave protocol. The process is unpleasant for the hatchling in the short term. It is not harmful in any lasting sense." "Your records say that," Roland said. Vret looked at him the way a person looks at a door they expect to open easily. "Yes." "All right," Roland said. Vret took that as agreement. Roland let him. Prin was waiting in the corridor outside. She had a data card in her hand. She held it out to Roland and looked at the wall while she talked. "I pulled the full conclave medical archive on forced bonding severances, every documented case, 14 records going back 400 years. She paused. "Every one of them resulted in permanent cognitive and emotional impairment in the hatchling, not temporary, permanent." She pushed the card into his hand. "I will deny giving you this if anyone asks. Do not tell me what you do with it." She walked back to the med bay without looking at him. Roland went back to the bunk. Syrah was sitting on his folded jacket in the center of the bunk, watching the door. She had been watching it since he left. When he came in, she made the sound she always made when she recognized him, low, brief, settling. She said his name. She could say 3 words now. His name was the second one she had learned. She said it the way people say a thing they have been holding ready. He sat on the bunk. She moved onto his knee. He read Prin's data card while she sat there. He read it slowly, all of it, every case record. Then he sat in the dark for a while and thought about Vret's face when he had said, "All right," and how easily the man had believed him. Then he opened his comm and did two things. The first thing was filing a formal request for a hearing before Admiral Don, with Prin's research as attached evidence. The hearing request triggered a mandatory review hold. Nothing could be transferred to the Conclave's custody until the review was complete. The hold was good for 48 hours. He filed it correctly, cited the right regulation numbers, and attached every page of documentation. It took 20 minutes. The second thing took 5 minutes. He found the name Elder Nor in the historical section of Prin's archive, an ancient conclave figure, still living, still a formal representative, whose name appeared in 3 of the 14 severance case records as a dissenting voice. The only dissenting voice. He wrote a short message. He did not argue, explain, or ask for anything that could be refused. He simply wrote that he believed Nor had seen this situation before, that he believed Nor understood what the bond meant, and that he was asking for the evidence to be reviewed before a decision was made that could not be undone. He sent it directly to the conclave vessel. Then he turned off the light. Syrah was already asleep on his arm. She was small enough that he could still feel the exact weight of her, not much still, but more than 2 weeks ago. Growing, learning new words every other day, still saying stay whenever he put on his boots. He looked at the dark ceiling. He had filed the paperwork. He had sent the message. He had 48 hours and 1 card left to play, and it was an old dragon on a diplomatic ship who may or may not remember what it looked like when someone chose to stay. He figured those were reasonable odds, for now. The conference hall on Aldrich Station had been built for trade disputes and supply negotiations. It had 12 chairs, a long table, grey walls, and lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell. It was, Roland thought, a good room for telling the truth in, because it offered no comfort that might soften things. Councillor Vret sat on one side with 2 conclave legal representatives, their robes pressed and their expressions indicating they considered this proceeding a formality. Admiral Don sat at the head of the table, technically neutral, practically exhausted. Dr. Prin sat against the wall with her files, officially as a technical witness, unofficially as the only person in the room who had done the actual research. Roland sat across from Vret. Elder Nor sat at the far end of the table and said nothing at all. He had not responded to Roland's message. He had simply appeared at the hearing, taken the chair at the end, folded his large hands on the table, and watched. His scales were the faded color of very old gold. His eyes were the dark amber of something that had been patient for a very long time. Vret opened with the law. He was good at it. The natal writ was clear, the precedent was clear, the jurisdictional boundary was clear. An unbonded hatchling found outside conclave territory was a conclave ward by right. The human had not filed a legal discovery report within the required window. The conclave's claim was therefore unambiguous. Roland let him finish. Then Roland said, "I am not disputing the law." Vret looked at him the way a person looks when they expect an obstacle and find an open door. "I'm disputing the outcome," Roland said. He set Prin's data card on the table and pushed it to the center. That file contains the conclave's own medical records, 14 cases of forced bonding severance, going back 400 years. Each one was performed legally, correctly, under the natal writ. Each one resulted in permanent damage to the hatchling. He kept his voice flat. "I am asking the Council to explain how their law produces that result and still calls itself beneficial." Vret said the records documented a difficult but necessary process. He said sentiment was not legal standing. He said the well-being of a hatchling, in the long term, was better served by integration into conclave civilization than by remaining with a short-lived species that could not provide appropriate care. "She can say 6 words, Roland said. "One of them is my name. She learned it in 9 days. "That is bonding behavior," Vret said. "It confirms the problem, not the solution." "It confirms she is not unbonded," Roland said. The room was quiet. Elder Nor moved for the first time. He uncrossed his hands and placed them flat on the table. He did not look at Vret. He looked at Roland. "Why did you not simply take her and run?" he asked. His voice was low and very even. "You had 14 hours before we arrived at the station. You could have been well outside conclave jurisdiction." Roland answered without pausing to think about it. "Because then I would be wrong. She deserves someone who isn't." Nor looked at him for a long moment. Then he said to Don, "I would like to see the hatchling." Bree brought Syrah in. Roland had not wanted to have her in the room for the arguments, but he had not wanted to leave her alone either, so she had been waiting in the corridor. She came in on Bree's arm, looked around the room, and identified Roland immediately. She crossed the table directly to him and sat on the back of his chair. Then she saw Noor. She went very still. Noor went very still. They looked at each other in the way two people look at each other when they are having a conversation no one else can hear. After a moment, Syrah turned around on the back of Roland's chair and sat facing away from Noor, looking at the wall. Noor made a sound. The translation system logged it as laughter. He turned to Vret. His voice had not changed in tone or volume, but something in it had shifted in a way that made the two legal representatives beside Vret sit slightly straighter. "The natal writ," Noor said, "applies to unbonded hatchlings. I am looking at a bonded hatchling. Those are two separate legal categories in our oldest statutes that predate the natal writ by 2 centuries. Vret began to object. Noor continued speaking, which meant Vret stopped. "A completed bond," Noor said, "cannot be legally dissolved without the consent of both parties. The hatchling cannot give legal consent under our own definitions of cognitive majority. Therefore, the dissolution you are proposing would itself violate conclave law, the very law you cited as the basis for this retrieval." The room was very quiet. Vret said, "The bonded party is not a dragon." "The statute," said Noor, "does not specify." Roland said nothing. He had read enough of the archive to know Noor was right, but he had not been certain Noor would say it out loud. He filed that information away. The hearing closed without a final ruling. A mandatory review by the full conclave was ordered. Syrah would remain in Roland's custody, registered and formally documented, pending outcome. It was not a victory. It was time and documentation, which in Roland's experience were usually the same thing. As the room cleared, Noor paused beside Roland at the door. He spoke quietly off any official record. "She chose well," he said. Roland looked at Syrah on his shoulder, then back at Noor. He did not have an answer for that, nor did not seem to need one. He moved on down the corridor, slow and unhurried, the way things move when they are not afraid of running out of time. Roland went back to his ship. 6 months is not a long time in interstellar politics. It is a very long time to live next to a dragon who is learning to talk. By the 2nd month, Syrah could hold a conversation. Not a long one, not a complex one, but she could ask questions, form opinions, and express those opinions with a directness that Roland recognized as something she had learned from him and Bree in equal parts. She told Warrant Officer Gale on Deck 4 that his maintenance logs were wrong in the same place every week, which was true and which Gale did not enjoy hearing. She told the cook that the protein paste on Tuesdays smelled like a warning. She told Bree, with complete sincerity, that she was loud in a way that seemed useful. Bree considered that the best compliment she had ever received. The crew of the Iron Gate adapted the way crews do, not all at once, not by decision, but by degrees. Someone started leaving a small section of the common room bench clear because Syrah liked to sit there in the mornings. Someone else stopped propping the corridor door open because the draft bothered her when she was sleeping. When a visiting supply inspector came aboard and asked why there was a non-regulation biological entity in the common room, 4 different crew members gave 4 separate explanations before Roland could say a word. The inspector filed his report and left. The report noted an unusual crew morale index for a ship of this class. He did not elaborate. Prin kept watching. She wrote 3 papers that she did not publish, which Roland found out about and did not mention. The resonance Syrah produced, the calming frequency, the one that had started as an involuntary fear response in the locker, was now deliberate, controlled. Syrah used it without being asked and without making it obvious. When Roland came off a difficult shift with his jaw set and his shoulders too high, she would sit near him and the room would feel slightly easier to breathe in. He noticed, he never said anything about it. One day, he asked her directly. "The noise inside you," she said, "it gets loud sometimes." "What noise?" She tilted her head the way she did when she was choosing words carefully. "The kind that does not have a sound, but that I can still hear." He thought about that for a while. "Does it bother you?" "No," she said, "I just make it quieter." He picked up his work and did not say anything else. She took that as agreement, which it was. They stopped at his home station for a resupply in the 4th month. He had not been back in 3 years, which was longer than he usually intended. He took Syrah. She had never seen humans outside of a military context, no children, no elderly people, no ordinary midday crowds. She sat on his shoulder and turned her head in small, precise increments the entire walk through the station, cataloging everything. A child, maybe 5 years old, saw her from 20 feet away and came over immediately the way children do, without any of the caution that adults perform. She asked if she could touch the dragon. Roland started to redirect. Syrah stepped forward on his shoulder and let the child touch her nose. The child said she was pretty. Syrah said thank you, which the child found extremely exciting. On the walk back to the ship, Syrah was quiet for longer than usual. Then she said, "You were all small once." "Everyone is," he said. She thought about that the rest of the way back. The preliminary conclave review came in during the 5th month. Nor's signature was on it. The language was favorable without being final. The full ruling would come in another 6 to 8 months, but the preliminary assessment supported the bonding classification Nor had argued at the hearing. Vret had been reassigned to a different posting. Nobody said this was connected to anything. Roland read the document. He set it on the bench. He went back to the pressure valve he had been calibrating. Bree read the document over his shoulder. "This is good news," she said. "It is preliminary." "Roland." "It is good news," he said. Bree decided that was enough for one day. In the 6th month, Syrah was big enough to sit on his shoulder without him having to brace for her weight. She was not big, the size of a large cat, maybe, but she was no longer the creature that had fit in the interior of a helmet. Her voice was steadier. Her vocabulary was larger than some of the junior crew members, and she knew it, and had the good sense not to demonstrate this in front of them. Late one night, with the ship quiet around them, she asked him the question. "Why did you keep me?" she said. "Not why you did not report me, why you kept me." He was quiet for long enough that Bree, pretending to be asleep on the other bunk, stopped pretending and lay still instead. "You were scared," he said, "and small, and somewhere you should not have been, and nobody was coming." Syrah considered this with the seriousness she gave to things that mattered. "That is a very human reason," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is." She settled against his shoulder. He looked at the ceiling. Neither of them said anything else. 3 days later, the orders came in. The Iron Gate was being reassigned to the fringe expanse, back to the debris field where this had started. There were new tensions there, questions about the conclave transport that had been destroyed. The official line was still incident under investigation. But the word from people who actually paid attention to these things was that it was not an accident, and whatever had been on that transport mattered to someone enough to make sure it was gone. Roland read the orders twice. Syrah was watching him from the workbench. She had been watching him for a while. "You are thinking loudly again," she said. "We are going back to where I found you," he said. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had been waiting for this specific sentence and had been ready for it for some time. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You know something you have not told me." "Yes," she said. "I will tell you when we get there. Some things need to be seen, not described." He did not push. He had learned in 6 months that she was usually right about what needed time. He filed the compliance acknowledgement and started pulling up charts of the fringe expanse. The debris field was bigger than the charts said it would be. That was the first sign. Charts do not grow on their own. Roland stood at the observation window as the iron gate moved in slowly, and he counted the spread of wreckage against the old survey markers in his head, and the numbers did not agree. Someone had added to this field after the original survey, or something had happened here that nobody had filed a report about. Prin had both screens running in the bio lab when Roland stopped by. She had pulled Syrah's resonance data from the past 6 months and was overlaying it against the field's background radiation readings. She showed him the result without explaining it first, which was how Prin showed you things that she thought the data should speak for itself about. The pattern matched. Syrah's resonance frequency, the one she produced when she was calming the room, the one Prin had been recording and documenting for months, was buried in the background radiation of the debris field. Not as a coincidence. As a source, something out there was producing a resonance signal, and Syrah's frequency had always been an echo of it. Something in the field is still active, Prin said. Roland went to find Syrah. She was already in the corridor outside. She had been waiting. She looked at him and said, "It is time to show you." She led him to the EVA bay. They went in slow, in a two-person pod, with Syrah perched on the instrument panel and talking Roland toward a point in the field that was not on any navigation chart. The wreckage around them was old, older than the transport incident that had supposedly brought Syrah here. Roland flew and said nothing. Syrah watched the debris with the focused calm of someone returning to a place they had always known they would return to. Inside the hollow core of a destroyed vessel, something ancient, something that had been here long before the transport was destroyed, they found it. It was the size of a large storage crate. It had no seams, no joints, no obvious material. It pulsed with a low light, blue and silver, and the air around it had the particular quality of a place where something very old had been kept very still for a very long time. Syrah called it, in the dragon tongue, a deep name, a resonance anchor, a living record not written, not stored in any system that could be deleted or corrupted, but encoded in a resonance pattern that would outlast the vessel around it and the civilization that built it. The Conclave used them for knowledge too important to write down. The transport was not carrying me as cargo, Syrah said. She was looking at the anchor, not at him. I was the guardian, an unbonded hatchling assigned to protect this. Someone knew what was inside it. Someone wanted it destroyed before it could be delivered. What is inside it? Roland asked. The record of the first cross-species bond, she said, and the name of the elder the Conclave erased for arguing that such a bond was legal, 800 years ago. Roland looked at the anchor for a long time. That is what someone wanted gone. Yes, she said, that is what I was protecting. He nodded slowly, then we protect it. That was when the faction ships arrived. 3 of them, Conclave Registry, flagged under a diplomatic exemption that Nor later confirmed he had never authorized. They came in tight formation and broadcast a single demand. The anchor was to be surrendered and destroyed. The Iron Gate was to stand down. Roland looked at the 3 ships on the pod's proximity screen. He looked at Syrah. He looked at the anchor. Then he flew the pod back to the Iron Gate and went straight to the communication deck. He did not call for weapons. He did not start powering the drive for a run. He sat down at the broadcast station, opened every channel available in the fringe expanse, civilian, military, Conclave patrol, independent relay, and started transmitting. Prin's 6 months of data, Syrah's resonance records, the anchor's outermost signal layer, which Syrah translated in real time, her voice steady, her words precise, the coordinates of the debris field, the registry of the 3 ships outside, all of it on open broadcast to every receiver in range. The faction ships held their position. 2 hours away, 3 Conclave patrol vessels changed course. Roland sat at the broadcast console and kept transmitting. Syrah sat beside him and kept translating. The anchor's outermost layer was not the full record that would take years to fully decode, but it was enough. It named names. It documented decisions. It showed clearly what had been buried and why. 2 hours is a long time when everything you have done is being broadcast to open space. The faction ships withdrew. When Nor arrived with the patrol vessels, he went directly to the anchor. He stood in front of it for a long time without speaking. Then he said something in ancient Draconic that the translation matrix partially rendered as "the record survives." The full conclave review closed the following month. The ruling was unanimous. The bond was recognized. Roland Varys was formally registered as a bonded guardian under conclave law, the first non-dragon to hold that classification in recorded history. The elder named in the anchor was formally restored to the conclave's historical record. The faction was disbanded. Vret did not comment publicly. Sometime later, back on the Iron Gate, Roland was in the maintenance bay. The same bench, the same tools, the same particular hum of the ship around him. Syrah landed beside him on the workbench. She was the size of a large dog now, and she landed carefully because she was still learning how to account for her new size. She watched him work. He did not look up. "You are thinking loudly again," she said. "Am I?" he said. "You are thinking this was not what you planned." "Nothing I planned is what I planned." She considered this. "Is that bad?" He set down his tool. He looked at her, this creature who had chosen him in the dark, in a helmet, when she was small and scared and out of options, and he was the least remarkable option available. She had chosen him anyway. He still did not entirely understand why. "No," he said, "it is not bad." She put her head on his arm. He picked up his tool and went back to work. In the corridor outside, Bree stood at the window for a moment, watching. Then she went back to her shift. She did not say anything to anyone about what she had seen. She did not need to. Some things are complete without being described. A man and a dragon in a maintenance bay, both of them exactly where they chose to be. That was enough. It had always been enough.